Over here, Mr. Jeff Demon is the director of the brewing, both for here and the pub. And Luke is the director of doing everything in the building, from brewing, filtering, kegging, bottle lines. We don't drive trucks, but no. We're all three of us got our starts down at the pub. I started off dishing and bussing and became a brewer. Jeff was a brewer back on the West Coast in Seattle. Jeff. And then moved here and started brewing. Although I think you bussed
I
in
did
the
bust
early
tables
90s.
in 1989.
And Luke started off in the kitchen down there and moved into the brew house, and then we came over here all kind of, and Jeff still does a lot down at the pub too, which we'll get into. But real quick history about the building. Well, first of all, Free State started in 1989 down at our pub and restaurant. Hopefully everyone's there, and if you haven't been there, go there after this. We started this building in 2008. We had a small fire that put us back about a year. In 2009, we finally got the brews going, and in 2010, May, we did our first bottling out of here. The original bottle line is no longer in the building. We've expanded into a larger south side of the warehouse that we'll go to see the bottle side. We started with 4 fermenters and 2 bright tanks. Bright tanks are for the filtered beer. We now have 13 fermenters and 5 bright tanks. We have 1 tank that looks like it is an old fermenter that is specific for souring or to make our guava toss, because we like to keep that tank a little separate from the souring process that Jeff may go into. At this point, I want to remind everybody there's a men's bathroom right here on the wall. There's a women's restroom kind of right through here on the inside of that hallway there. Feel free to walk back to the bathroom if anybody needs. We're going to go through the brew process, then we're going to go to the cellar. Then we're going to go to the bottling line, and then we're going to drink cold beers. And we're going to have some shirts and stuff over there for sale if you'd like. They're also available online or at the pub. And feel free when we're done and we're mingling with beers to ask questions if you're nervous about asking a question in the middle. And it's very hard for us to touch on everything in here. There's a lot going on. So if there's something that we kind of jump over and you don't get it, feel free to find one of us, and we'll walk right back over there, and we'll talk about it at that point. So, hi guys. At this point, I'll introduce Jeff D.
So thanks for coming out, folks. The area that you're standing in right now is obviously a warehousing area. It warehouses a broad variety of things, empty kegs, some packaging materials, but it also houses our bag malt. So you also saw some when you came in. We get bag malts in a truckload at a time. And then we also get silos full of malt that are outside. We have 2 silos. Anybody know what malt is?
A grain.
The stuff that makes beer.
What? No, the brewers are what makes beer. No, malt it starts as a grain. Well, it is a grain, but it starts as a seed. Generally speaking, we use barley malt in the brewing process. We also use wheat malt at times, sometimes rye malt. But it starts as one of the seeds of those grasses, and then the maltster will hydrate that seed, allow it to germinate, and once the full modification of the seed takes place, meaning that the seedlet grows all the way across the interior of the seed, then the maltster halts that growth and heats up the seed, basically kills it by killing the seed, and at that point it's malt. Transformation has occurred during that time, whereby long chain starches have been broken down into more accessible, more formidable sugars that we as brewers can access. We'll further process that malt later on, and so each recipe has a varied quantity of malt, and is made up of different malts. So any given recipe has the greatest percentage of malt coming as base malt. And so we have 2 base malts in the silos out there. One is 2-row barley malt, and the other one is called Golden Promise. Golden Promise is a malt that comes from the UK, from Scotland. Our 2-row comes from Minnesota, and our supplier is in Minnesota. So it gets trucked down, 40,000 pounds at a time for bag malt, and 47,000 pounds for the silos. So that's about a month's supply for us. So we go through quite a bit of malt. For us as brewers to really access what we need from the malt, we have to mill it first. And so you want to come down this way.
The malt I handed out, feel free to taste it if you like, chew it up. It's kind of good. If we pass hops around, don't taste that.
So in this little room over here, we have our mill. The mill is essentially two sets of rollers, or two rollers that come together, and they have a little tiny gap in between the two rollers. And they're rolling towards one another, and grains coming down, and gently just passing through that gap and getting cracked open. We're not trying to pulverize the malt. We just want to gently crack it open and largely keep that husk intact. It passes through this conduit on its way there. So we have three sets of augers. We have two augers for the silos outside, and then we have an auger right here that has that's for all the bag malt. Any given recipe will have a portion of bag malt, and the brewers will fill up this super sack with that bag malt first, hoist this bag over, and then open it up and allow the grain to fall into one of these hoppers here and head towards the mill via this conduit that has a chain disc on it. So the malt will get picked up, sent over to the mill, and then it's just a big loop. So on the other side, after it's been milled, it gets picked up, and now it's called grist. And it heads over to this container here called the grist case. At that point, we want to take note of the temperature that we have here. That's the temperature of the grist. That's important for us because we need to hit a certain target mash temperature for each given recipe. There are enzymes that are present in the malt that are active at certain temperature ranges and will break down the long chain starches that are in the malt into short chain fermentable sugars that the yeast will be able to metabolize during fermentation. If we didn't hit our target, then we wouldn't end up having the sugars available for the yeast. So our job as brewers is really to kind of make sugar water for the yeast to metabolize. The yeast does a lot of the work. The yeast actually makes the beer. We make the wort, and the yeast makes the beer. We can come into this area now.